Dismissal of my case is affecting every blind guide dog user across Canada. In Kamloops, a whole fleet of cabs refused two blind people with their guide dogs. They complained and nothing has happened about it. It was in July 2014. 4 of us went down to a restaurant in Victoria, Earl's Restaurant, and had a great evening. And one of them at the end of the evening said, well, I'm getting a cab. And I said, sure, okay. So he phoned for the taxi. And when it came, the waiter shouted to us, the taxi's here. So we all got up and went to the door. And then when we got outside, the driver said, nope, can't take the dog. And we said, well, you know, it's a guide dog, and oh, doesn't matter, can't take the dog. And I told him it was illegal. It's illegal. And he said, oh, well, can't do it. It's illegal to deny a blind person with a guide dog accessibility, public access, and a taxi is public access. So he knew that it was illegal. I asked him, actually, was the reason this allergy thing? And he said, well, if you like. And I said, well, you know, what does that mean? And that was it. So I wish I'd never asked him, actually, because to mention it was, that's the only reference there ever really was to what his reason was. And anyway, so another cab came. When I got home, I thought, this is pretty bad. So I emailed the cab company, Victoria Taxi, and he said, oh, that shouldn't have happened, is the email that came back. And I thought, yeah, that's right, it shouldn't have happened. But he said, let me look into it. So a couple of days later, he sent me another email. He said, yeah, he was one of the people that was exempt from taking dogs. And he said, we have 15 cabs out of 43 on the road that won't take guide dogs. And he seemed to think that that was okay and quite acceptable. And I said, well, do you realize that's called discrimination? I emailed him back, and oh, well, it's, you know, that's our policy. So I decided to file a human rights. And it's important to realize that a guide dog with a blind person is just an aid to the Guide Dog and Service Dog Act. Says that we have equal access with our dog, the same as equal to everybody else. The second clause says that no one shall interfere with that right. We have right of access, same as everybody else. And that includes transportation, taxis. But unfortunately, enforcement doesn't seem to be part of the government's mandate. The driver has all the power. They just take off, most of them. The only reason this one in 2014, July, didn't take off is because he didn't have time. Would have probably taken off if he saw the dog and got a chance to get away. And see, what is happening, because the government enforcement procedure doesn't occur, a right of access is being reduced. When you have 15 cabs, which is almost 1/3 of a fleet, it's pretty bad. I filed it with the human rights. There seemed to be difficulties created all the way along the process. I never got a proper paperwork sent to me. I never heard anything from the taxi manager or anything at all from the driver. As soon as the taxi manager heard that I was filing, that was it. So that was about September, October. So we went all the way through right till April of 2015, the next year. And I still didn't have anything from anybody, because you're supposed to submit disclosure, it's called, whatever evidence they have for the treatment that I received. Case manager, they call them, said, oh, we should have a telephone conference. So we had a telephone conference in April, end of April. And the night before this telephone conference, I got this thing in the mail from the taxi company, which was a recording of the dispatch information and a little note which said that the driver shouldn't have contact with dogs. And that was it, the medical note. It didn't say any objective evidence of why or the reason. Anyway, the date was, the date of the paper was December 3rd, so 6 months almost after the event. The meeting occurred on the phone, and the head of the whole Human Rights Tribunal, Mr. Walter, I didn't know who he was. I thought his name was Walter somebody. So I said, well, I'm not sure who you are, Walter. Well, he said, it's Mr. Walter. I said, oh, well, okay. He was the head of the BC Human Rights Tribunal. And he, first of all, spent the first couple of minutes scolding both of us, me for going straight to a public hearing, because I'd said that I didn't want to do a settlement or a mediation, because he asked me why, and I said because 6 months later I'll be doing another one. We've got to explain that this got to stop. You know, there's systemic discrimination here occurring, that people are choosing, excuse me, not to recognise the right of access of blind people. And it's about blind people, it's not about the dog, the guide dog. The guide dog is just a tool that is part of human rights law of access, basically. And anyway, he then scolded the taxi manager for not getting a lawyer, and told him that the note that they had, they must have got it before me because he knew all about it. He said, oh, that's not good enough. You need more paperwork than that. But just the tone of the Human Rights Tribunal was very punitive to both of us. And it must have been 6 to 10 times he told the taxi manager, oh, you must get a lawyer, you must get legal representation. And he never did, actually. Middle of July, 1 year later, after the incident, the public hearing was held on the 15th. It was just a day different. I had a phone call just 2 days before from a lady at the tribunal, a Miss McCreath, Kathy McCreath, I think her name was, and she said, oh, well, you have time to change your mind, you can mediate. I said, no, there's nothing to mediate. I want a proper decision. Oh, well, it may not go in your favour. I said, well, hopefully it will. And she said, well, you weren't inconvenienced very much. I said, well, I don't think discrimination has anything to do with how much you're inconvenienced. The impact is immediate and is very humiliating. It damages dignity. You are embarrassed in front of other people. You are in a public place. Pretty bad. And she said, oh, well, I don't want to argue with you. Now, this is a human rights person employed by the government to make decisions. And she is blaming the victim. Oh, you weren't inconvenienced much, so what are you complaining about? Well, I think that's absolutely shocking. I think to treat people like that is no, there's no part of human rights involved in that. From the moment I went in there, we were kind of scrutinized with our identification, our proving blindness, and we were actually asked to show the original copies of things like the guide dog certificate and things like that I got from the training centre. And I had all these 3 other people who were there, a couple of blind people and a sighted guide, testify of what happened. And then, on the other hand, when it came to the taxi driver, he never showed up, he wasn't there. His evidence was scanty that it was, because it just said he couldn't have contact. College of Physicians and Surgeons that say any third-party report has to contain objective evidence of a condition the diagnosis, the treatment, and this kind of thing. And this contained absolutely nothing. It was just a note signed by a doctor saying, very subjective, oh, he shouldn't have contact. Well, how does he know that? He hasn't shown anything to show that. And also the time was 5 months after the note. Amazingly, the tribunal member, who is supposed to be impartial, said that she referred to it as a medical report. So you just have to wonder what is not valid here. I mean, the human rights people even said that before the hearing, but at the hearing they accepted it. So I'd actually hired a lawyer the last couple of days before, thinking it would help, and the taxi company didn't have a lawyer, just the manager on his own. He just made comments like, well, I'm not sure if it's an allergy or a phobia, that the guy told me. And so it was very vague, the whole thing. And the software was listed that these 15 drivers out of the 43 cabs, they didn't want to take animals, to include guide dogs, which should never have happened. There were 5 owners out of the 15 cabs that they didn't have any medical evidence or anything. They said they just didn't want to take dogs. And it's extended to guide dogs with that, which is wrong. We had the discriminatory write-up done by the tribunal. Their official decision was really very poor. If we don't pre-identify, in other words, tell the taxi company that we have a guide dog, then, we can't expect to be accommodated. And they let the 15 cabs go. They never commented about that was discriminatory. They said I was discriminated against, but because a cab came very quickly, I wasn't inconvenienced much, which is totally against all the ideas of discrimination. It doesn't. Rosa Parks wasn't inconvenienced very much because she was still on the bus, just because she was at the back. But it's the fact that she wasn't allowed to sit at the front, which was the discrimination. So it really does have nothing to do, discrimination is not related to inconvenience. And said the taxi driver, he made an effort to get me another cab. Well, that doesn't stop the discrimination just because he did that. But the cab was just across the road. He waved to the other cab and he offered to take me. But taxi manager even apologized outside the courtroom when we came out, that he really didn't realize how much impact it had, and maybe it's not very good to do. He was actually quite apologetic. This has been brought in because guide dogs with blind people, some folk don't want them, and you have to say, no, you don't have a choice. If you're providing a service, whether it's a restaurant, a bus, or in a taxi, or anywhere in a public area where all the public's allowed to go, then we go with the same. We don't have to have permission to do that. Unfortunately, taxi drivers do have all the power. We have none. We're vulnerable citizens, and because we can't even see the cab, they drive off. They pretend they didn't see you. They do all kinds of things. Certain ones, this is not every cab, of course. We do get rides eventually, but nothing should be eventually. It should be equal to everybody else. We're supposed to be compliant with pre-identifying, so the taxis that want to take us can, and the ones that don't want to take us don't need to. And that's really what we're battling right now. It's now generally, quote, generally accepted that blind people should pre-identify with their guide dogs. And then, because it's helpful. It's helpful to allow discrimination, to enable discrimination. That's the only thing you're helping. The owner of the cab chooses not to allow dogs or animals, quote, animals in his vehicle, then we are refused as well. We've tried to fight this. We went to the BC Judicial Review, then we went to the BC Court of Appeal, and we went to the Supreme Court of Canada. However, all the way, there was never any discussion on the decision by the court of what our submission involved. The decision was made by the tribunal, and they are paramount, and basically that is it. They just reiterated what they said. And I didn't think it would. But you have to protest. Well, if you just walk away and let it, you haven't demonstrated any resistance and opposition to a very poor decision. And I think they actually got the message, but it was a lot of hard work. I cannot believe how much work we did on going, especially to the Supreme Court of Canada. It's a lot of work. And without all the help of my family mainly, we would never have achieved it. I think our submission was very professional, very well done, and right to the point. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court chose not to accept it. And they don't have to explain why or say anything. If you refused public access, there should be a fine, and it's over, and that's it. And if the people keep doing it, they increase the fine. But if you file a human rights, there's all kinds of twists and turns to it that sometimes gets in the way of justice. Justice did not occur with us.